Hello, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Let's law better. Together we explore topics of interest to legal operations. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. And don't forget to have a blast. Shaking up the legal world takes a lot of elbow grease. So let's make sure we've got each other's backs along the way. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. This is the part where we talk to legal operations professionals. And today's episode is dedicated to this book. I'm not sure if you've seen it. You probably have because there's quite a lot of us and we made a big noise about it. About 50 of us got together and wrote a treatise. There's no other word for it, about legal operations for both law firms, in-house departments. And I am on the mission to bring as many contributors as I can to you for a conversation. So without further ado, I have an amazing contributor with me today. I'll let her introduce herself. Tanisha, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you so much for having me. So, my name is Tanisha Minev. I am a legal counsel currently for a fintech based in South Africa called Yoco. And I am predominantly involved in commercial and corporate matters, but I have a strong passion for legal operations and creating efficiencies using technology.
I love that. So before you were a legal counsel, how did you get to where you are? And even more importantly, or as importantly, you just shared your passion for legal ops. How did that happen to you?
Great question, Olga. So, when I think about actually getting into legal ops, it really happened quite on accident. I've shared a little bit of my story on LinkedIn previously, but it was quite an untraditional journey that led me to various different legal adjacent roles while I was still qualifying or before I was qualified as an attorney. And in those roles, I often found myself in the position of really focusing on process improvement. We all hate doing mundane, monotonous administrative tasks and really wanting to work smarter, not harder. And so found my way really into operations, yeah, in that way, in just improving processes, trying to standardize the way that we work to make things easier.
So it's interesting you mentioned legal adjacent role, and then you also mentioned it in the context of legal ops. Those are two distinct terms, and I'm just curious for you. We mentioned standardization as well, a few things. What does legal ops mean to you? It's a discipline that's been around for a little while, but it is very much evolving, and the exact definition is taking place. So I'm curious, how would you define it, and how do you think about it in the context of operating a legal tech, a fintech company as counsel?
I've seen a lot of chatter about this recently, especially in terms of maybe why we make this distinction about legal operations and whether it shouldn't just be operations, because isn't that what we're doing? But to me, legal operations is creating efficiencies. It's taking what we do and it's doing it better. And for me, in two words, that means continuous improvement. That is what legal operations is to me.
Okay. And I know in your work, you're very much focused on, technology and data. And, this book has both data and technology and AI in its title. And your contribution fits very well in that theme. How has technology, data, and AI transformed the way you look at the legal department and the way you operate it?
Wow. So I think the legal profession, more than others, has been a little bit resistant to change and a little bit resistant to the forward movement of using technology, and maybe also been a little bit scared. I think during last year, we saw people getting quite nervous with the developments in AI and what that would mean for transactional lawyers. But for me, it's not taken away from anything that I can offer, but it's actually just helped me be able to do tasks in a more streamlined and efficient way using technology, leveraging AI, being able to bring in tools or even leverage tools that we already have in the organization. And that helps me then to free up my time to focus on more strategic and maybe more important aspects of the business and how I can really support them in a long-term way versus, just needing to push paper, which a lot of the legal profession in-house is.
I wouldn't limit it to in-house. Pushing papers is what we do
Yes.
often and sometimes. It's what needs to be done a lot of times. And doing
Yes.
it well is actually important. So doing it better with technology is maybe a really fantastic idea. It is true that law is very paper words intensive. And so there is the sort of element of pushing paper and button pushing. That's kind of what we do sometimes to get to the other side. And then there is a strategy, which is the most important. And I think what you're saying, you need to focus on that. How can we free up not just time, but headspace to focus on that? For me, that's a headspace part that is most important.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly it because we are exhausted by the time it gets to anything strategic or forward thinking and making an impact in that bigger way, because we're spending so much time on these kind of tasks.
Yeah, yeah. No, it takes energy. You can choose your energy to put on strategic parts, or you can put it on things that needs to be get done. Even if you still have time at the end of the day and willing to sacrifice your sleep, I don't recommend. You still don't have the headspace to be a strategic thinker, just because we have a limited capacity for that. Let's talk about pitfalls because the excitement and the value here is that ability to be a strategic partner, which is what our in-house colleagues, our business partners expect. But what are the pitfalls of AI, data technology, that you can sort of think as we are implementing many of those technologies or experimenting with many of these technologies?
So, Olga, I think twofold. I think, firstly, if you don't really understand the technology or how the AI works, you won't be able to actually see its full potential. And then on the back of that is solely relying on those technologies, not fact checking, not doing your own due diligence, because obviously we know that AI can support us so far, but we still have a duty to really fulfill our roles and ensure that we're maintaining quality. And then the second thing is when we are implementing technology, I think a lot of the time we get really caught up in that implementation without really focusing on change management, without focusing on how we roll it out to the users to make sure that it is something and that we have a return on investment, because a lot of the time we see CLMs fail all the time, and it's not because the CLM didn't have the functionality, but maybe the users didn't know how to use it, and it wasn't properly rolled out, and then we have a failing system. So I think that's definitely a pitfall.
So we've had this massive boom with Gen AI. I mean, it made an entrance, and we're still processing it. What's next? Especially, let's put it in the context of legal departments. We're hopefully on the end of sort of excitement and hype and nervousness of that, and now are looking for use cases and looking at it at more programmatic way. What do you predict the role of Gen AI in legal defense?
So
I
that
am known for my easy questions, by the way.
it's like,
I,
I think there was so much talk about the language models and all the GPTs, and I think that we're going to see a lot of refinement in that coming up. I can't really speak to where I see that going, but I mean, Olga, you have a lot of experience in this area, so can you share with us what you think is coming our way?
yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there is a public tool that people can play with. It's limited in what we can, as lawyers, use it for, outside of sort of marketing, business development, and routine sort of administrative tasks that do not have confidential information of our clients or tasks that require a small margin of error, right? For example, when
Mm.
you file something with the court or doing research for case law for your contracts, your margin of error is pretty small. And I don't think ChatGPT or equivalent tools are able to meet the requirement either of confidentiality or
Mm.
margin of error for majority of actual legal tasks that require precision and duties. I do think that for administrative business development and marketing and brand building exercises, it could definitely create efficiency. So what I expect, I do think it's a powerful tool used in specific narrow circumstances, developed in the right way by private companies and
Mm.
rolled out for specific use cases to solve very concrete problems. I think that's where we're going, especially actually kind of more on a strategy side where creativity as opposed to precision is encouraged, because I think this the strength of this tool is in interpreting and summarizing and kind of thinking outside the box. It is a very sort of creative tool this way. And for that purpose, I kind of see the use case when it's designed correctly in sort of enough guardrails. That's what I would expect. And I see quite a few tools developing for that purpose. I wonder, you know, from your point of view, if I am a legal tech or legal ops enthusiast or leader, when I'm looking at a department in the beginning, would you focus on AI use cases or where would you focus?
Definitely not. So I think, look, it depends on the maturity of an organization, but most times when we're just beginning on the journey with legal ops, I think that the mistake that people make is thinking that legal operations means technology. Yes, we definitely can use technology, AI, and leverage amazing tools out there to help us create these efficiencies and free up our time. But what tends to happen is that we get lost in the chaos and we don't actually go back to the basics and figuring out what problem we're trying to fix. And that's when the data really comes in handy. And I touch on this a little bit in the chapter in the book, Olga, where we can really rely on the data to find those weak spots in a legal team. And even, I guess, out of when you're trying to implement legal operations, you have to first understand what the problem is to be able to adequately fix it. So I think starting really at the basics and figuring out what your key issues are. If you have processes, how can you refine those? If you don't have processes, can you put those in place? And then of course budget is a big thing. If we're starting from the get-go, it takes a lot for an organization to have buy-in and spend on legal technology when they're not familiar. So very often there might be tools that you're already using in an organization like Slack or Jira, Monday.com, these kind of tools that can integrate and you can actually build some kind of workflows to help you on this journey before we look at more advanced technology and AI.
Let's explore those separate. The first, you focus on data, and I kind of want to explore a little bit more. Say you're sort of in the beginning of your journey, you looking at people, processes, and then at some point, I think you one of the elements you mentioned is data.
Mm.
What would you look for, and where would you find it? And if you don't find it, what would you do about it?
Great question. So this is it because I think a lot of the time we don't really know what we're looking for. So the first point that we need to think about is what we're really trying to improve. You know, are we trying to help in-house lawyers in this specific scenario to have specific protocols or standardized ways of working? Um, are we trying to develop a contracting policy? So, really understanding what you are trying to help your team with first. And the first thing that I think I would look at in that scenario and using the data is to track what kind of matters your in house team are actually working on. So, where is all of their time being spent, or the majority of their time? What kind of tasks are coming up repetitively? Are they getting 10 NDAs a week, or are they getting a lot of mundane corporate activities. So really understanding where their time is spent. If we track that, the second step would then be to look at ways of improving those processes to streamline and maybe cut up some of the waste within those tasks.
So, well, let me ask you a quick question. How do you figure out where time is spent? Do you ask people to keep track of time?
Well,
I mean,
so
my next question is if you do, because
yeah,
I know people who do. How popular does it make you?
no, no, we're definitely not keeping timesheets. We're definitely not billing hours to matters. But look, I think it's really simple as just tracking, if in a day your legal team receive 5 requests, I mean, and this is now for a small organization, out of those 5, how many are NDAs, how many are bigger agreements? And we can do that maybe for 2 weeks, until we see how where that time is spent. So not so much in terms of like I'm spending 3 hours on this, or I'm spending 5 hours on this, but just tracking what we are seeing a lot of repetitive tasks coming through.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of legal ops professionals about this issue. It is definitely not a popular thing to ask folks in the legal department to start keeping track of time, but doing it for a limited time, like a couple of weeks or a month, is actually a doable thing. It is sometimes met with more resistance than others, depending on the organization and the leader. But people usually understand that. If you do it, of course, long term, you really may have challenges as a leader when you do that. But at the end of the day, you can't improve if you don't have a baseline of what's happening, and approximation only takes you so far.
Exactly. And the flip side of it, if we didn't do this tracking exercise, we might waste a lot of time in trying to optimize something that is unnecessary. So for example, at Yoco, we are not sales driven, or in terms of like a legal department, we're not selling like a software, that kind of thing. So in a department or in a company that maybe was, you would look at things like trying to enable the sales team to get deals through. You'd maybe want to implement checklists. Maybe if we were negotiating a lot of master services agreements, we would want to implement a playbook. But if your business is not really focused on that, if you have standardized online T's and C's, that would really be a little bit of a waste of your time and your efforts, because at the end of the day, you're not actually optimizing your legal counsel's time or any process that really makes an impact.
Yeah, I have a great comment from the audience from Sally, agreeing on understanding the data so you can improve. And thank you, Tanisha, for giving very actionable ways to do that. I think one of the things you actually, not me, maybe I mentioned it as well because I've been advocating for this as well, using existing tools. Your business professionals have Jira, have Salesforce, they have quite a lot of things. Zendesk, they have various e-signature tools. Um,
Salesforce, yeah.
yeah, all kinds of things. And I a long time ago, when I was number 2 lawyer, number 1 lawyer, I created various contraptions to streamline things. What do you recommend, or what have you had good experiences with, Tanisha?
So I think the easiest win for me was actually implementing or creating a workflow legal front door using Slack. So when I joined Yoco, there was a really informal way of requesting legal help, and that meant someone could walk past you and ask you for help, or somebody could Slack you, somebody could email you. So not standardized at all. Again, no way to track how we were getting those, and then also to measure what our feedback was like, what turnaround times, that kind of stuff. And so we did go to market. We demoed a whole lot of very expensive tools, and then came back to the drawing board and looked at what our core requirements were. And we found that actually using Slack, we could create a workflow that could integrate with Notion, which we already used as a task board. And yeah, integrated that with Google Docs as well, so that we could have all of our documents for review coming through there. And all tools already used by the business, no extra cost, not having to train people on how to use a new system. And I think it's been pretty successful. So that was an easy win.
Yeah, no, I love it. The Google Doc is another one, especially if your organization allows to use it, depending on the size and stature of the organization. That may or may not be an option. You could also have various Microsoft products as an alternative, usually. So there are ways to do Epic with existing
Absolutely.
tools.
Absolutely. There's definitely a way.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few more questions. We are unfortunately sadly coming to the end. I do want to
That's
focus. I know times does go by. I want to focus on a couple of things. One thing I want to focus is you mentioned at some point when once you sort of inventory and understand what data and process and people you have and all kinds of other things, and you maybe understanding the baseline and then maybe implemented some of the things there you already have existing tools on the business side, you may be ready for the advanced tools in law. So my first question is, what does that mean to you? And then my second question is, how do you know you're ready? Like, how do you know that the time has come for us to be advanced?
So I think for me, probably it's a little bit of two things. So it's volume based because I think we have to justify the cost of needing to go bigger, right? And that volume also speaks to capacity in your team. And I think that when you know that you really need the help, it's time to go big. We have the basics in place. We have our sort of manual workflows and we know how we want something to run and how we want it to work and what our desired outcomes are. Because I think that's often the thing that we forget about is that we're not only looking at what's in front of us right now, we want to look at long term and what our outcomes are and what our value proposition is. And once you have all of that in place and you understand that well, I think that's a good time to look at leveraging tools.
Okay, I'm gonna dig a little deeper because this is important. Maybe let's start talk about what are examples of those advanced tools. Like, what what are you considering sort of ninja tools?
Oh, so recently I demoed a really great one. I'm not sure, Olga, am I allowed to mention specific tools?
I mean, let's talk about it in generality. I try to keep it promotion free, so
Yeah, okay. No,
this is
that's
a neutral place where folks share about their experiences
um,
and best tips, and they want to reach out to you for recommendation. I'm sure you will welcome that, but I'd like to keep the
okay.
show as a
No, that
neutral
makes
zone.
sense to me. I'm glad I asked. Okay, great. So it was a tool with actually embeds or integrated into Microsoft Word, and you build your playbook on the back end of it, kind of with a checklist. So, for example, if it's an NDA or confidentiality agreement, you build in what your preferred positions are, what your secondary positions are. There's a guidance and also a commentary section, and literally as soon as you open the Word document, it starts running the checks and it already tells you, like, let's say 16 checks passed or however many failed. And then at the click of a button, it will redline everything that didn't pass your checks with your preferred language and include commentary as to why you prefer that. And that is a really good example for me because if I had tried to use a tool like that when I had first started in this role, it would have been impossible because we hadn't actually developed what our basic or our preferred positions are in contracting. So you can't really think of automating something like that before you actually understand what your positions are. Um, and yeah, so that's been really, really cool to see develop.
Yeah, I agree with you. Contract tools are definitely, if you appreciate complexities of those tools, there's sort of CLMs, there's intelligent, there's drafting tools, there's word based, there's sort of platform based, various things. I think you mentioned that there is sort of a high rate of contracts tools failing. I think it's partially because you don't always need what you want. You think you need something from a refrigerator section of the supermarket. You grab yourself milk, whereas you really needed eggs.
Exactly.
And so that sort of ends up being a failure. Understanding that technology stack in contracts, and then figuring out where the biggest value is. It on the process side? Is it on the intelligence side? Is it on the in the way you can kind of draft quicker, sooner, cheaper? In the end, you may build all of those parts, but being soberly aware where the value is for your company, I think is very
Exactly.
important. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, other than contracts, what other tools do you think are sort of advanced tools for a legal department?
That is a difficult question. I think we see so often we automatically go to contracts or CLM for tools. For me, I actually think it's more of a legal front door that I find more valuable. I think to have really good oversight over what's happening in your team and also in your business and what your priorities are, it's really helpful to have a good tool that almost works like a ticketing system where you can track where matters go, where they're going to, if escalations need to, occur within a system. That I've found really useful just to keep a finger on all of the moving parts in the legal department.
Yeah, I find it's interesting that you reacted to the question outside of contract this way, because isn't it true that what happens in the legal department, independent of whether you call it product support or business support or contract support or litigation matter, like you deal with contracts all the
Fully.
time. Oh, or HR support. There's a lot of contracts, and then that's why sort of understanding the needs and technology stack of it is very important. And I like your first reaction, like what else is there? I think it's absolutely on point. Contracts is sort of the big thing in house. And I definitely agree with you that at some point you outgrow your Jira or Zendesk, and you actually, if you want to have better analytics and stuff like that, you definitely want to have a more advanced tools that has all the bells and whistles. Again, they're quite even in that there's quite a lot of tools on the market, and understanding what and why you're measuring and what are you trying to improve, I think is a big
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, exactly, Olga. And it goes back to that value proposition again, because we're not just implementing for the sake of implementing. We should have a solid purpose and outcome.
Yeah. I have another great question from Sally. Would you think of automation as advanced that interact with the business and push contracts through processes beyond legal departments? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that that is advanced. And actually, I thought of this as you were speaking as well, Olga, because you mentioned how so much has to do with contracts. And we tend to think of contracts very much in just a legal sense. So our NDAs, our MSAs, our services agreements, even employment agreements. But actually, I mean, any business is selling something, right? And in selling something, we're creating contracts all the time. And I found myself actually recently using our CLM to empower our sales teams, our partnerships teams, basically anybody that deals with a third party to use the same tool that we are using in a really, really effective way. And exactly like the question mentioned, automating that process. And it's for various different actual business tasks. It's not strictly legal. And it's been really great because it also helps me show when it comes for time for renewal and I have to convince the tech guys and finance that I need to renew this contract, I have some great data that it's beyond just the legal department that it's creating value for.
Yeah, no, you can definitely show ROI. I'm curious, rolling out a CLM outside of the legal department that you were successful to do that. What is sort of your top tip for that success? What is, if somebody wants to replicate this, what do you recommend that they do?
I think it goes a long way having individual training sessions with people and also just understanding the different processes that occur within your business. A lot of the time, as legal, we're an enablement function. So, again, we focus very much just on the legal. I take a very different stance in that we are business advisors. We're here to support the business and to push the business forward. So, whether that's a legal tool or just a plain tech tool, if that can be accomplished and you can help, that definitely goes a long way. So I've really tried to pay attention to what occurs in the different parts of the business and where I identify that, oh, actually there's a process there where there's a document that's going out, or that needs to be signed or needs to be approved. And we can use the same tool and then just having a short demo with them, building an example, prototype to show them how it would work. And so far, I think there's 2 or 3 different departments that are now using the same tool, and successfully. So that makes me happy.
I love that. We are definitely coming to the end. I'm looking at chapter 10, which is the one you wrote, the beginner's guide for in-house legal counsel navigating legal operations. I love that it has pictures. I am a sucker for pictures.
I'm a
And
very visual person.
I will not buy a book that doesn't have pictures. This is why I refuse to buy books in law schools. Who pays a ton of money for books with no pictures? I really don't understand that. I will never understand it. I love pictures. I'm a visual person. I can't just buy things without pictures. So I love that you focus on the beginners because many of us are beginners in this legal ops space. And so I'm going to ask you maybe 2 more questions. One question is around, you know, given that many of us are in the beginning of this sort of maturity of the legal department, what is the one thing, what is the biggest impact, short term, medium term, long term, a legal ops department can do for legal department and for the company in general?
So, 2 big things, time and money, which I think means the most to us, right? The biggest impact is that we can free up time to focus, like I mentioned, on the more strategic things. I mean, maybe it's not strategic things, maybe it's also just things that are more fun than the awful repetitive tasks that we have to do. And long term, if we stop spending really expensive legal resources on those kinds of tasks, we're saving, we're getting a real good return on investment because actually our people are a huge investment and they can add more value in more strategic ways, focusing on the business more. And then also just in terms of literal saving money, we upskill our people, we stop relying on external counsel, we build tools, processes, and workflows that support the business from the inside out, and we eliminate that waste and that extra expenditure.
Time, money, lives. That's what we save. I love that. We are in life-saving business. You have a few folks who agree with you and admired you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. Sally, thank you for commenting and sharing your insights. You've been very active, which I appreciate. And then you have a fan and Jeff who is here to support you as well.
Thank you.
So our time unfortunately has come to the end. Tanisha, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you. And even more importantly, having had this experience of collaborating to produce a treatise. We did not set out to produce a treatise. It just happened to us. Because we had so many amazing contributors and I love rereading the chapters. What is the one thing you want to give as a takeaway to those folks who operate legal departments, whether they're in the beginning, middle, or end? What is the one thing you want them to take from this conversation where we've covered quite a lot of ground?
I think, Olga, like we said in the very beginning, just going back to basics and also just start. Don't let it overwhelm you. Pick one thing that you think could be better and make it better.
I love that. Pick one thing and make it better. I mean, I think that's true for everything in life, but definitely for legal operations. Tanisha, I love this conversation. I love the
Thank you,
simplicity.
Olga. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self, Let's Law Better. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Just remember, the future of law is looking pretty awesome. Let's team up and shake things up in the legal world together. See you soon.